I can't remember a time in my life when I didn't procrastinate every single task or project assigned to me. For being honest here, I basically made it through McGill doing everything at the last minute. I would study for exams or write essays the night before, and I often had to pull all-nighters or cancel social plans because I needed to, once again, push something over the finish line at the very last minute. And while I knew that this was unhealthy behavior on some level, it wasn't until I entered the workforce that it really became clear to me how unsustainable and toxic this behavior was, and how I really needed to change my working style and my approach to my perfectionism. So today I'm here to tell you about how I've managed creative procrastination in my professional and personal life. I have found ways over the years to deal with it so that I can still be productive, I can still do well in my career, put out content, do things like that, because I love being creative. I love building things and making things. This is by no means the end-all be-all guide to creative procrastination. It's going to be really different for everyone, but I wish that earlier on in my career, maybe even in university, I had figured out ways to deal with this, recognizing that it was normal and that it was okay, and that there were ways to deal with overthinking, perfectionism, procrastination, etc. So welcome back to my channel. If you don't already know me, my name is Tamara and I'm a brand strategist and writer living in London. I try to make videos about career and brand and self-development, and today I'm super excited to be telling you about my experience and tips for dealing with creative procrastination. So it didn't really occur to me how much of an issue procrastination was in my life until I could not do it anymore. Once I started working in consulting, I became accountable to team members and managers and could no longer get away with just doing things by myself the night before without any external influence. I now had review cycles. I needed to get stuff client ready ahead of time. I had a very intense workload, which meant that I needed to get through things quickly and productively. And so it was very early on into my career that I realized that procrastination wasn't gonna cut it for me, but I didn't have an alternative. I had literally had these hardwired patterns in me for years, and I didn't really have healthy ways of working, which is what I needed to figure out. It's also around this time that I saw a therapist to deal with my anxiety and my perfectionism, and actually understanding the relationship between perfectionism and procrastination was a huge unlock for me. So a lot of people really misunderstand procrastination. They will see it as laziness or just putting things off because you don't feel like doing them. It's actually a lot of times the opposite. A lot of people experience procrastination alongside perfectionism. As a perfectionist, you basically don't want to execute on something, or you have a hard time delivering on something because you don't feel like it can be perfect, or because you want it to be perfect so badly that it takes you forever to do. When people experience this anxiety tied to perfectionism, they will basically go into fight or flight mode. People who go into fight mode will typically be those you see going through every single detail over and over and over again, unable to sort of let go of the work and are working overtime and overtime in order to make sure that the work is perfect. You'll also have people who experience flight, which is basically to leave the scene, to be paralyzed by fear, to just not tackle it head on, which is the experience of procrastinating, which was how I oftentimes experience perfectionism. Although, let me be clear, there's a healthy mix of, being super detail oriented and terrified that there's going to be a mistake, and then also just trying to avoid the task altogether. It's all very unhealthy. We're dealing with it. So once I figured out the root cause of procrastination for me, I was able to see my working patterns a lot more clearly and start to develop solutions and ways to overcome this anxiety and this procrastination. Specifically, I actually saw it really flare up when I was doing creative work. So if I was doing like an Excel model or doing research where there was a clear answer or a clear output, it was actually much easier for me to just get started and to focus on the task at hand. Where I really struggled is with subjective work. So doing something creative like coming up with an idea or writing a script for something, or doing anything that requires a sort of creative lens, which is the work I love to do most in the world, in my life, etc., was just so hard for me, because how can you ensure that it's going to be brilliant or perfect? You can't. It's subjective. And so that thought was incredibly paralyzing and overwhelming to me. But as I mentioned, being creative is what I love to do. It's also a huge part of my job description because I am a brand/creative strategist. And so therefore I needed to find healthy ways to overcome this so that I could be my best self, bring my creative self to my work and my content and to everything that I do. So the good news is that there are ways to overcome it, and that's what I've sort of learned the hard way through tons of research, and I'm a self-development nerd. I've also spoken to a lot of people on this topic, and I'm going to talk you through the 4 things that I've done that have had the biggest impact on helping me with this. But I've come to a point in my life now where I no longer will procrastinate every single task, and I'm able to be productive and professional, which has been, a really big area of growth for me that I'm really proud of, actually. So anyway, let's jump in. So the first thing I've learned the hard way is to get over the cold start with the shitty first draft. It sounds simple enough, but starting is usually the hardest part for perfectionists. When I see a blank piece of paper or a new Word document or a PowerPoint, something like that, all I want to do is fill it with the most beautiful words and a woven together narrative, and I hate the idea and the thought that my first draft is going to be horrible. But the reality is, especially in creative, subjective work and or collaborative work, the first draft is going to be shit. And so the faster you can accept that and just do it, the faster you are to actually creating a wonderful piece of work. My anxiety is really at its peak when I first get briefed on something or first decide I'm going to work on something. So let's say my manager asks me to pull together a narrative for a client, or I decide to write a YouTube video about Dunkin' Donuts, for example. I will then have all of these ideas bubbling in my head usually, or I'll be really excited about it, but there is a massive gap in my mind from what's in my head to the final product. And I want it to be the final product so badly that I just don't know where to start. And so the workaround that I found to this is just to put things down onto paper the minute that the ideas are in my mind. So as soon as I'm briefed, I will open up a new Word document or open up whatever preferred form at the time, and I will just write down everything that is bubbling in my mind. So everything that seems obvious, all of the questions I have, all of the unrelated things. Oftentimes I'll just reiterate the brief or reiterate what I was thinking about or writing about or talking about with whoever I'm working on for this. And just to have it all in one place already makes me feel like I'm making progress and I'm able to see all the parts in one. The key is really just to build momentum. Because this is the highest peak of my anxiety, my initial drive or reaction is just to leave, to go get a snack, to go calm myself down. But actually this is when I'm most fresh, I have the most ideas. And actually the longer I wait, the more I delay this cold start or the frozen start at that point, the more I'm going to be left with a difficult task, and I'll have less ideas in my head, it'll be less pleasant, etc., etc., etc. So as I mentioned, I put everything down onto paper in no particular format, and then I will start to see basically natural groupings or patterns in my page in front of me. And this is how I'll start to put together a structure. It's really important for me to be hypothesis-led because I'm a perfectionist, because I want everything to be just right. If I go the other way and I go bottom up, starting with a ton of research and all of the inputs I could possibly have, I will get so overwhelmed by what's perfect or what's possible that I won't be able to actually do anything. So actually this initial note-taking or structuring session is super critical to me because it will set the tone for how I'm going to work on this for the rest of the project. So the result is a very shitty and very rough first draft. Usually that doesn't make a lot of sense, but you will come out of it with a very rough structure as well as some dig sites of where you want to go next. So instead of being overwhelmed by research initially, once I have this first structure and this first draft, I'm then able to see where it's worth spending my time, and also allows me to be more efficient and productive with my time. And so this for me has been probably the biggest game changer in just overcoming creative procrastination from the very start. A small aside here, I've actually found that ChatGPT is an amazing tool for getting over the cold start problem, whether it's just reiterating the brief, so putting down all of your thoughts. I want to write a YouTube video about X, Y with the goal of this. Just briefing the AI forces you to think through and write down the quote obvious, like I was just talking about in my initial sort of drafting process. It's super important and will allow you to start making connections and to come up with more ideas. Additionally, ChatGPT is amazing for giving initial feedback, which I personally find very motivating. So I love the fact that I can feed it a paragraph or a script or something, and it will tell me, this is what you're doing well and this is what you're not doing well. And I see it as kind of like a little reward.
as like a reward.
I mean, usually you can you can tell it to give you positive or negative feedback. I usually do like 5 positive, 5 negative things. Yeah, this is a little bit maybe embarrassing or like nerdy, but getting the positive feedback is like a very good motivator for me to start. So anyway, ChatGPT, just don't feed it confidential client information and talk to your boss about it if you are going to use it. So the second thing I do is make a step-by-step plan for dummies. We're not just talking any sort of to-do list, which is what I used to do in the past. I would just be like, great, I have this project or this task to do. Here are the 6 things I need to do in big buckets. No. What I do now, and this is a recent addition to my productivity, creative procrastination toolkit, is to make a step-by-step list of every single thing I need to accomplish, every tiny piece of research, every slide I'm going to make, every paragraph I want to write, every single thing in a list, in a format, ideally nested. So I'll use Todoist for my personal projects, and I'll use Logstack for work. This can take quite a bit of time. After I've done my initial note-taking process, I might then spend another 30 to 45 minutes listing out all the tasks associated with it. And initially, I didn't feel like it was worth it, but I have now totally changed my mind on that, and it is a huge time saver and really allows me to not go down anxiety spirals, which is critical for my procrastination. So doing this does 2 things for me. One, I always know what's next, and that's absolutely critical. If I don't know what task I'm working on now and what I'm going to do straight after this, I will feel so overwhelmed by the bigger picture, and I'll start asking myself questions like, am I doing it right? Am I solving the problem right? Is the work I'm doing good enough? Etc. And this really gets me down an anxiety spiral. Whereas if I know that I've rigorously planned out the entire project and all I need to do when I'm in execution mode is focus on the task at hand, that will give me such a sense of calm that I can just focus on what I'm doing right now, check it off the list, and then move on. This is also great if you're doing work that spans multiple days or weeks, because you always know where you stand in your process. Planning ahead also allows me to get a better sense of how long the overall project will take, as well as the individual tasks, which is really important for me. I struggle a lot with time management, not in that I'm bad at managing my time, but more that I'm constantly self-conscious that something is taking me way too long, and or I might spend, because I'm being perfectionistic, start to dig too deep into the research, or I'll start to, spend too long aligning things perfectly on a slide, silly things like that. And so getting a better sense of how long something should take me overall, and then sort of mentally noting down how long each individual task will take me, which is critical for me, again, to not spiral into anxiety. So the third thing I've learned is that I need to give myself time in order to get into a flow state. So we talk a lot about deep work and flow and needing to get into flow in order to have a really productive and efficient working sessions. This is something that I've known, I've done research on, I've read Deep Work by Cal Newport, something that's very much alive and well as a concept in my brain. However, what has taken me a long time to realize is that the first few minutes of doing anything, that adjustment period when you're going from one task to another, when you're getting into a deep flow state, is going to suck no matter what you're doing. I have a hard time starting something, whether I'm doing something I love, like writing fiction, or on the other hand, doing something I really don't enjoy whatsoever. Spending those first 10, 15, sometimes even 30 minutes are going to be painful, and I just needed to accept that and work through them. Something I really struggled with my perfectionism is I felt like every time I sat down to do something, it had to feel effortless or it had to feel good. If not, I wasn't doing it right or I wasn't good enough, and I would sort of blame myself and or blame the environment and tell myself, oh, I'll just tackle this, I'll pick this up later. However, what I realized is that no matter when, no matter what, no matter who, whatever it is, the first few minutes are not going to be fun. And so it's critical that you give yourself enough time and accept the fact that those first few minutes aren't going to be fun, work through it, and then let yourself get into that flow state eventually. It really was an issue because I would only give myself 30 to 60 minute blocks of time between meetings at work, and I would expect myself to jump off a meeting, use the bathroom, get a snack, get a coffee or something, and then spend the rest of those 50 minutes or 45 minutes in a deep flow state and be able to accomplish everything I needed to do. And if I didn't, I would feel guilty or like I wasn't good enough. Now, I've just learned that in order to get something productive done, I just need more time. And let's say I need a 90-minute block or a 120-minute block. Sure, I'll take a 10-minute break. And then it's really critical for me to give myself that time for the adjustment period where I don't feel guilty and where I'm just able to get into things the way that works best for my brain. The challenge here is to really avoid multitasking, because in this flow state, once I'm in, or even just during the adjustment period, if I'm answering Slack messages or I'm getting emails, my brain is not going to be able to focus on the task at hand and actually get into the flow state. However, and I'll talk about this more in a minute, it is critical that you incorporate time for breaks, ideally not answering Slack messages, doing something that is restful, getting away from your desk, going outside, something like that. And actually, the way that I now really love to work is I'll include Pomodoro, which allows me to take breaks, but my first working session on a particular topic or a task will be longer. So I'll have a 1 hour or like a 55-minute working block where I'll include that adjustment period. And then every block thereafter will be shorter, because if I'm only taking a 5-minute break between things, I don't need as long of an adjustment period or don't need any at all. And so therefore I'll do like a 90-minute block or a 1 hour block, and then 30-minute blocks with 5-minute breaks in between. And I find that's really awesome for my working style and allows me to get a lot done while still taking breaks. And this brings me to my last point, which is to bake in time for breaks and or feedback. So when I was in university, I would do everything the night before, which meant that I never had any time to review my work or to share with people to give me feedback on. And I think that was a sort of coping mechanism. I was so scared to get negative feedback and then be faced with the reality that I needed to redo it or to make changes that I just would hardly read it and maybe do a quick spell check. There is nothing that will make your creative work better and your work experience more enjoyable than having time for breaks to let your brain do its thing and to come up with new ideas, to have time to collaborate with people on things, to come up with insights together, and to just not feel like everything is super time pressured. Coming back to the first point, critical to put in breaks once you have a first draft in. It's very difficult to improve on something or to get feedback from people when you don't have a first draft. So my whole caveat in this section is get your thoughts down onto paper, ideally in a structured way, in a way that makes sense, in a way that you can share to people or can read later, and then use that as your starting point, and then create a work schedule where you do have time for breaks. So your brain is meant to switch between two modes. Focus problem-solving mode, which is when all of the parts of your brain tied to solving one problem will work together in unison in order to do that thing. But there's also diffuse mode, when all of the ideas, especially the ones you've just been working on in focus mode, will be bobbing around in your head and making unexpected connections. And it's in this diffuse mode, which only happens when you're away from your desk, out in nature, taking a nap, in the shower, ironing, doing something that isn't related to the problem solving and the task at hand, that you will experience little moments of brilliance or kind of creativity. And so when you think about some of the geniuses of the world or, big thinkers, they often talk about having their best ideas in the tub or, eureka moments away from their desk. And this is exactly why. And so my point is that you need to bake in time in order to have these unexpected connections, to have these bouts of creativity in your workflow. And actually, if you're working on something for 30 minutes or an hour or 2 hours and you're stuck on it, usually going away, taking a nap will allow your brain to reconfigure itself and to actually come up with the solution and to help you move forward with that task. And so it's really critical that you have these breaks. So while short breaks are super important for you in the moment, there is nothing like a good night's sleep or a few days away from a topic in order to help you make real progress. Coming back to something with fresh eyes will allow you to see connections you didn't see before or make improvements off the cuff. It will also allow you to find new ways to collaborate with people on a topic. Finally, you might not consider this a break, but the most important thing I've found, especially working collaboratively in consulting, is to bake in time for feedback. Working with partners, my experience is that most of the stuff that you put out is going to change anyway. And so you are much better off sharing an early draft that is maybe 40 or 50% correct, getting feedback and going iteratively from there. And you need to bake in time for that. If you bring something to a review with a partner or to an executive or to a client at a last round where you are, 95% sure, the chances are it's going to change just as much as the version that you would have brought it at 50%. So therefore, if you want to have something be the best it can be, you're better off getting in front of those eyeballs very early on, making the changes, and then going from there. And so that has been my experience. I also really enjoy the process of going back and forth. It builds in breaks, it builds in a workflow so that, I know that I'm creating a first draft early on, gonna send it, gonna get feedback, etc. So you're not working insane hours trying to make something perfect without knowing if you're in the right direction or not. So this video was a bit longer than expected. Once I started writing it, I was actually really surprised at how many tools I developed over the years to deal with my creative procrastination. As I said earlier, it's by no means the end-all be-all of solutions, but I've found these ways of working really helpful to me and have just made me a happier and better creative. So if you are a classic overthinker and perfectionist like myself, please let me know your own ways of dealing with this down in the comments below. This is just what's worked for me, but maybe it'll inspire you to change your approach to work. So thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you next week. Okay, cheers, bye.